we're now moving on to the Q&A section. So we have around about 10 minutes for some questions. So first question is for you, Krista. So you presented some really interesting data there. And the question's around whether there's any gender effects for the safety considerations for the use of intermittent fasting.
Oh, great question. We actually just published a paper about a month ago or so looking at like gender differences. So just to kind of summarize, men and women tend to lose the same amount of weight. Interestingly, postmenopausal women tend to lose about twice as much weight with intermittent fasting as premenopausal women. I know that there's a lot of questions about like safety, particularly for women. This hasn't been really well evaluated. I know that there's like a lot of stuff on the internet about time restricted feeding. I guess there's a lot of stuff on the internet about everything, but in particular, it says that it's like bad for women for fertility. So just to clarify, no study has ever looked at intermittent fasting on fertility. The only study that's looked at whether or not it affects female hormone levels is a study by Michelle Harvey done in 2011. So she measured with the 5-2 diet if any of those change, and there was no changes in any female hormone levels at all. And then there's a study by Moreau looking at in men if hormone levels, testosterone is changed with time restricted feeding, and there's no effect there either.
Okay, great. So the next question, this is one for you, Emma. So it's asking about the diets that are used coming through from the audience. I'd like to know if coffee and tea without sugar and milk can be consumed during fasting time.
I would say in terms of absolutely, anything that's calorie free. So caffeine will obviously have an impact, but not in terms of the energy restriction. So yeah, not a problem, anything that's calorie free.
Great, okay, thank you. Krista, another one for you. It's about the use of time restricted feeding as our weight maintenance tool, which you just quickly went over towards the end of your talk. So what duration have the studies been looking at that? So is that quite short term as a tool, or can you remind us the time frame that your studies have looked at, please?
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I went over that slide pretty quickly. So we've never looked at it for weight maintenance until this kind of long-term trial that we just started now. So we plan for that study, we're comparing time restricted feeding to calorie restriction to a control group. And it would be for all of them a 6-month weight loss phase followed by a 6-month weight maintenance phase. We're not quite sure. We're kind of shooting in the dark here since no one's ever run a maintenance study. We're doing 8-hour window for the weight loss phase, and then we're going to expand that to 10 hours for the weight maintenance. Whether or not that will work for weight maintenance, I'm not quite sure.
Great. Okay, thank you. Emma, a question for you again from the audience. Can you comment on whether the results are equivalent to obese subjects or overweight, or what we term obese but otherwise healthy? So maybe you want to think about defining overweight and obesity and perhaps those with type 2 diabetes.
In terms of the research, as I mentioned, and as Krista mentioned, it's very limited in terms of the number of studies that have been done, but the only outcomes really are in overweight. Now, in terms of definitions, if you're looking at overweight, you might consider that in different ethnicities that would actually be a lower body weight, and there hasn't been some work in that, certainly, but overweight rather than necessarily obese.
Okay, great. This is a really good question for Krista. So you were mentioning the impact of sleep, and this is sort of related to that. So whether time-restricted feeding helps manage cravings better than traditional calorie-restricted diets. So I'm sure if Abd was here, he would have something to say about that, because that's his area of expertise.
So again, no study, or maybe I didn't clarify this. No study has ever been done comparing time-restricted feeding to a traditional diet. So we're running the first one, and it's in process now. We're not looking at craving, but we probably should be. That's a great question. We are looking at changes in like appetite and gut peptides, so maybe we could have some answers for that later. But yeah, maybe we should put in some craving questionnaires too. It's a great point.
Yeah. Okay. But the other question that's popped up, which I feel is quite personal, and don't know, is, do either of you use fasting? So
it made me smile when I saw it come up.
Yes.
No, sorry. Maybe I should. Maybe I should. No.
Okay. Thank you.
I used, I have two like young boys, and I did use alternate day fasting to lose about like, about 10 pounds or so after pregnancy. And then I tend to like stop eating around like 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. like after dinner. Just after doing all this research, it seemed to benefit. So
Krista, then, do you think that morning eating is more beneficial for appetite control than having a longer overnight fast and then having a more advanced eating pattern towards the evening then?
I think so. I don't think there's any studies that have directly measured that. Courtney Peterson is kind of the person that's studying at University of Alabama, Birmingham in the US. She's running a trial now to look at kind of early versus late time restricted feeding. And I think those results will probably be published in a couple of years. So we'll have like firmer answers on that. But I don't know. I would expect, like, as I mentioned before, eating earlier in the day is definitely healthier for you, but I think people are going to have a really rough time if their eating window stops at like 2 p.m. Not only can they not socialize, but like, I wonder how that's going to affect sleep. Like if you have like a 10-hour window or a 9-hour window before you go to sleep, I know if I'm super hungry, I can't sleep very well. So yeah, those are all the questions that we really need to ask when we're running those early versus late. But there's still, from my understanding, not a study that has directly compared that. There's been studies of like early time restricted feeding versus controls, but nothing. It's a very new field. All this data has just come out in the past like 5 years. But I'd say in total for all of time restricted feeding, there's probably like a dozen clinical trials total that have looked at anything. So we don't have any answers really for anything. Sorry about that.
Great, okay. And then the last question I want to pick up on is if either of you are aware of any studies looking at PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome linked to restricted feeding, because one might imagine that there would be benefits of improving insulin sensitivity or with this type of eating. So that's for Krista or Emma.
It would be interesting actually, because as well as the weight loss which you might get, you might see a change in terms of the insulin resistance. But no, not that I'm aware of that's been done.
Okay.
No, I'm not aware of any studies that have been done either. But yeah, it'd be really interesting to test just any type of intermittent fasting in that population.
Good. Okay, so that's the end of our Q&A session. So just to say thank you to Emma and Krista, and we're going to pick up on some of the discussion that we haven't had time to cover at the end of the session.